I just finished up making these two cutting boards. This was my first time making one of these. It wasn't as hard as I thought, and they turned out really sharp. So if you'd like to learn how to make one of these, stick around and I'll show you. And please don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button so I can keep making more videos just like this for you. The first thing I'm going to do is take my joiner jig and take my rough lumber to get a square edge. I've got a great little video on how to make one of these joiner jigs, and they are super useful. My blade just happens to be a little too shallow for this, as this board's a little over 2 inches. But I'll just flip it over and cut from the other side and get one straight edge. Then I will use my fence to get the other straight edge. I'm using two different species of wood here. One is walnut, the other I'm not 100% sure, but the grain kind of looks like oak. It's got a golden color. I don't know if there's such a thing as golden oak, but that's what I'd call this. Have a look, and if you think you know what species it is, leave a comment below. These slabs are actually about 2 inches thick, and I don't want my cutting board to be that thick, so what I'm going to do is cut them about 1.25 inches width, and then lay them down so they're about 2 inches wide. I'll use my table saw again to make sure the joining edges are nice and square. You also need to make 2 thinner pieces per wood type. These are going to serve as the accent pieces. The most important part of this is make sure that you've got the same design on both boards that you're about to glue up. For instance, I've got 2 accent pieces per board. I'm going to make sure I've got a 2 inch, a 1 inch, a 2 inch, a 1 inch, and then mirror that on the next one as well. With 2 identical designs on the clamps, I'm going to add some glue, spread it around, and clamp it all together. Make sure not to glue the 2 cutting board ends together, or you'll end up with one big cutting board as opposed to 2 smaller ones. At this point, I didn't put a lot of thought into the thickness of the individual boards. Some are thicker than others. Once it's glued together and squared up, I will run it through my planer and make sure it's all the same thickness. Now that the glue's dried, I grab my crosscut sled. I've also got a great video on how to make one of these as well, so have a look at that. And I'm not cutting it to the finished length or width right now. I'm just going to square it up. You do, however, have to make sure both pieces are identical. When squaring up the width, I make sure to take it the furthest away from the 2 accent strips. With both boards cut identical, it's time to try to come up with an angle to put these 2 pieces together. So again, this crosscut sled's got a great video on it, and it's got some jigs that's going to allow you to hold the angle. The most important part here is that you have an identical angle on both of these cuts. And I don't measure for this angle or use any kind of geometry. I just kind of set it on the edge of my crosscut sled and see what I like. So once I get my little jig in there and it's nice and tight, I'll also use my stop block to repeat this on the second board. So now you've got 2 identically cut cutting boards. One piece should fit the other, just as the original ones did. You may have to clean up the edges a little bit and play around with your sander, depending on how straight your blade is. I did have to do a little sanding on mine to get a nice tight fit, but overall it wasn't too bad from this table saw. Once you get a joint you're happy with, just spread some glue on it and clamp it up. I prefer clamping the bottom first, making sure that the seam ends on top of the clamp, and then I'll put some clamps on the top of it as well in the opposite direction. This part is super important. You've got to make sure that your accent pieces line up perfectly before clamping it down. Also run your finger over the top and bottom and make sure it's not sitting proud on one side. Once it's dry, run it through your table saw one more time to make sure everything's squared up on all edges at the final dimensions you want. Now I hit everything with 150 grit sandpaper. All sides, give it a quick sand, but the most important part in my opinion is the water pop. I do a water pop on almost everything that people are going to grab with their hands or feel all the time. It makes a big difference. This is going to let the grains raise out. Once it dries, you hit it with another grit. I prefer 220, and it comes out very smooth. I just love the feel of it. Now that everything's sanded, it's time to put a coat of oil on it. I've been using walrus oil for about 2.5 years now, religiously, and I love it. No complaints at all, so I always use it. I'll let the oil sit for about half an hour to an hour, come back with a cloth and buff it dry. And this is the result you get. Two beautiful, unique, shiny cutting boards. Thanks for watching. Please take a second and just hit that like and or subscribe button. It really makes a big difference for a small channel like mine. Have a good one.